Let's talk about Oklahoma and Texas moving on from the Big 12 to the SEC. Is this the right move for both teams? And if they do move on, what should the remaining 8 teams do in the Big 12? And what should the Big 12 do in response? Let's get those answers and more. My name is Mike, and this is the Sports Betting Tik Tok podcast. So in sports betting terms, this is very disappointing because we're all used to seeing Oklahoma play Texas Tech, Baylor, and what those teams do against each other. Usually, bettors have a familiarity with these teams. So from a betting perspective, as an avid sports bettor that I am, I know Oklahoma in and out better than probably anybody. Outside of people in the program, outside of people who live outside of the stadium of Oklahoma, I know how to bet Oklahoma better than anyone. Oklahoma is my favorite team to bet on. I've been doing it since 2007 during the Sam Bradford years. Oklahoma, the last 13 years, has been money for me. I'm probably hitting 70 to 80%, picking over-unders and the spread in an Oklahoma game. So now that they're moving to the SEC, I'm not going to have that familiarity. So I'm not going to be a big fan of this move, at least for the first couple years. Now, in terms of Texas, Texas is a program that hasn't been doing too much in the Big 12 in terms of winning titles in basketball or winning titles in college football. They just haven't done anything recently. The last good season they had was the Colt McCoy years. Now, the reason why a lot of people are... So, is this a good move for Oklahoma and Texas? Let's take money outside of it. I do not know the financial details and the difference of each move. I'm not going to pretend I do. So financially speaking, I'm not going to talk about it. With the aspect of the college football playoffs, this is a dumb move. I mean, this is really dumb. Oklahoma and Texas would be guaranteed, one of those two teams, each year, to make the playoffs, because the winner of the Big 12 is going to be either Oklahoma or Texas. I would say 9 out of 10 years. You will get a TCU in, maybe a Baylor. Baylor's not doing what they were doing under Art Briles. That's another subject we'll talk another time of what happened with Art Briles. But with Oklahoma and Texas, maybe both teams would have an opportunity to get into the playoffs each year. With the SEC, I would say when Oklahoma would get into the playoffs 8 out of 10 years, it might move to 2 out of 10 years. It just depends on how loaded the SEC is and how many teams they get in. Will they get in 2 teams each year? Will they get in 3 teams each year? Will Oklahoma win 10, 11 games each year in the SEC? It's one of those things to be seen. I'll tell you that. But when you have a lot of great teams in the SEC, with the SEC championship itself, I think it's going to be difficult for Oklahoma to do what they've been doing, obviously. So I would say that move is not good for the college football playoffs. Now let's talk about the Big 12 conference itself. What should the Big 12 be doing? Now, in basketball terms, they got the defending champions. They're a great basketball conference, if not the best. Right now, they would be left with 8 teams. They would have Iowa State, Oklahoma State, TCU, West Virginia, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and Baylor. So if I'm the Big 12, the first thing I do is I reach back out to the Big 10 and I go to Nebraska and see if they want to come back. Not going to happen, but that's what I would do first. Then you have the Pac-12 conference. There's talks of a possible merger of a 20-team league. I don't see that happening. I just don't see the value in that for the Pac-12 to do that. If I'm the Big 12, I look for the teams that might be willing to come over. There's some rumors of them reaching out to Arizona State. Maybe they would want to come over because they're not happy being in the shadow of UCLA and USC and those teams. Can they reach out to Colorado to come back? If I'm Colorado, maybe I'm tempted to come back in the Big 12. Utah, maybe they can pooch Utah or steal Utah and take them into the Big 12. Do I see this happening? I don't. I just don't. So then the question becomes can they do something else? Maybe look at the SEC conference and maybe steal one of their teams. I'll be honest with you. If I'm Mississippi State, knowing my history, I would think about going to the Big 12. I think Mississippi State and Mississippi should look into going to the Big 12. I don't think they both go together, but one of those two teams should, because maybe they would stand out, win some conference championships with the teams that are remaining. It would set them up right. If I'm the Big 12, one of the things I do is reach out to Boise State. I think Boise State would definitely come to the Big 12. They'd be highly incentivized. They're a great football program. Basketball, they need some work, but they can play. I think Boise State would be the obvious team. But that would make 9 teams. I think we're looking at 12 to 16 teams that the Big 12 should be looking at. So now who else should go in? Let's look at BYU. BYU would be an obvious fit for the Big 12. They're great in basketball. They're great in football. They're a powerhouse program, independent, just like Notre Dame. I would go into BYU. So now we have 10 teams. Who else should they reach out to? Well, let's take a look at the American Athletic Conference. This is going to be the conference that's most affected by the Big 12 if they have its way. There's 4 or 5 prime candidates I can see. Let's start with Cincinnati. Cincinnati has a historical great college basketball program, and in football this past year, they played Georgia, one of the biggest bowl games that they've ever had in their career. I think the other one was against Florida, I believe, in the Sugar Bowl in Tebow's final season. That's off the top of my head. So they've been to a couple big bowl games in college football. Now, also, Memphis. That's a question mark to me. They've been recently really good in football. Brady White has left the program. I think Memphis was good under Brady White. For college basketball, we know Memphis is a great team when John Calipari was there. So they're pretty good in college basketball. That would be a team I would look at as well. Now, in college football terms, who's been better than UCF as a non-Power 5 conference in the last 5 to 10 years? They're that team. You want UCF. They got a great program. And now Gus Malzahn is now the coach. I like UCF and what they have to bring. This is where it gets a little tricky. If the Big 12 keeps Texas Tech and Baylor, do they want... Now here's the question with SMU and Houston. Does Texas Tech and Baylor want to have SMU and Houston in the conference? For recruiting purposes, I don't think so. But if I'm the Big 12, I want Houston. I want SMU. Both great in basketball. Both have historic great college football programs. Those are 2 teams I welcome in. So right there, the Big 12 can get back to 12 teams. Possibly 16 teams. You add in a couple more. But that's what I look at if I'm the Big 12. But now let's look at the teams if they want to move out of the Big 12 who are remaining and where they should go. So let's take a look. Let's begin with Iowa State. Iowa State, there's talks of them reaching out to the Big 10 to see if there's any interest of them joining the Big 10. If I'm the Big 10, is that the team I want? If I'm going to expand to 16 teams in the Big 10, do I want to bring in Iowa State? If I'm Iowa State, yes, I want to be in the Big 10. Absolutely. If I can't find a home in the Big 10, staying in the Big 12 is probably the biggest option that they have. They should absolutely want to stay in the Big 12. It's okay to have 8 members in that conference. I would stay there if I can't go to the Big 10. I don't know if the Pac-12 is going to open up to Iowa State, but Iowa State, either Big 10 or stay in the conference. Oklahoma State could absolutely move to the Big 10. And if I'm Oklahoma State, that's the place I want to go. There's only 2 destinations for Oklahoma State. Pac-12, Big 10 right now. Now, if I'm Oklahoma State, yeah, they could possibly go to the ACC, but the ACC would have to expand even further. If I'm the Pac-12, I want Oklahoma State more than anything. If I'm the Big 10, I want Oklahoma State. So the question is, where will Oklahoma State go? What my prediction is? I think they go to the Pac-12 if they move anywhere. And I'll give a prediction for Iowa State. I think they go to the Big 10. TCU is going to have some trouble. TCU, I think, is going to... The Big 12 has to definitely stay because I don't see TCU going to the Pac-12. I could be wrong, but I think they're better off having 8 members in their conference and reaching in for 2 to 4 other teams because they're going to be better off financially in the long term. I see TCU staying in the Big 12 unless the Pac-12 reaches out to them. My prediction is the Big 12 keeps TCU. West Virginia, I think this is another team that might be without a home. They're going to want to try to go back to the ACC. I think it was a mistake when they left the ACC for the Big 12. But I think, again, if the Big 12 can stay together with the 8 teams, West Virginia stays in the Big 12. Kansas State, staying in the Big 12. I mean, where else can they go? Big Ten's not going to want them. I mean, they're not. They're a team that they're like Big 12 written all over it. There's certain teams that can move conferences, and people will welcome them. I don't see Kansas State being one of them. Texas Tech, that's a team the Pac-12 could want. And I can see the Pac-12 getting Texas Tech and Baylor. I think Texas Tech and Baylor could make homes at the Pac-12. Now, the most interesting one is Kansas. Kansas should absolutely be in the Big Ten. If the Big 12 loses Kansas, there's going to be a lot of problems for them. Kansas is the one that can't go. Football-wise, who gives a fuck about Kansas? But in college basketball, any conference would love to have Kansas. Kansas is like the all-time great powerhouse. There's Duke, there's North Carolina, there's UCLA, and there's Kansas. Kansas belongs in any conference. The Big Ten would take them. The Big Ten would open its doors for Kansas just for college basketball. It wouldn't be great for football, but for college basketball, absolutely. So that's where I stand right now. I think at the end of the day, the Big 12 will stay together. I think they're going to bring in teams like SMU, Houston, Memphis, Cincinnati, maybe even expand it a little further. I mean, even if Army and Navy, they might want to bring those 2 teams in. I think also BYU gets in and Boise State. I think you can make a good powerhouse of a 16-team Big 12 conference if you bring in those teams. I think it makes a lot of sense for all those schools to join up in the Big 12. The American Athletic Conference is going to take a little bit of a hit. They might want to join up with the Big East in basketball and maybe recreate a Big East football conference. You know what? I'm going to take that back. I think you might have a Conference USA merger with the American Athletic Conference, or the American Athletic Conference just disbands, and the Mountain West and Conference USA will just take the remaining teams. That's probably going to happen in a realignment. So yeah, that's what I got for today. Thank you for listening to the first podcast. I will be back next week with another podcast with Sports Betting TikTok. My name is Mike. We'll talk soon.